session. I'd like to remind members and our guests to please switch off their mobile phones as they interfere with the recording equipment. Apologies have been received from Deputy Jack Chambers. I have no other apologies. In order to facilitate our witnesses, we will deal with private business at the end of today's meeting. The purpose of our engagement this morning is to conclude our consideration of the issues of community policing and rural crime, with the focus today more on the latter aspect. We are joined first this morning by the Irish Farmers Association representatives, as I understand they have to leave us a little early this morning, and we will then meet with the representatives from the Irish Cattle and Sheep Farmers Association. The Irish Farmers delegation with us currently are Deputy President Richard Kennedy. You're very welcome here this morning, Richard. And Barry Carey, the Crime Prevention Officer. You're also very welcome indeed. And we will be joined, we hope, shortly by the President of the IFA, Joe Healy, who is caught up in traffic at this moment in time. Now, you're both very, very welcome, and we want to thank IFA for facilitating our request. I will be inviting you to make your opening statement, whichever or both of you, as you have decided, before opening it up to members to comment or to put questions, which is the normal procedure. However, before we commence, I must draw the attention of our witnesses to the situation in relation to privilege. Please note that you are protected by absolute privilege in respect of the evidence you are to give to the committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that where possible, you should not criticise nor make charges against any person or persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. And members, once again, just the normal caution. You should be aware that under the salient rulings of the Chair, members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the House or an official by name in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. I would now like to invite, is it Mr. Kennedy taking lead, if you would do so, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman, Deputies and Senators. Thank you very much for the invitation to IFA to address you today. As you say, Chairman, our President Joe Healy is he's held up on hopefully he'll get here before we're finished, and he's at Ivy House. I think he had a meeting with the Taoiseach this morning, and I think the Taoiseach had an appointment on Morning Ireland, and Joe's meeting was held up, so he's trying to get here as soon as he can. So. I know, and as you said already, Chairman, I'm joined by Barry Carey, who is the IFA Crime Prevention Officer. I know that you are well aware of the real anxiety among the farming community and rural communities generally over crime in the countryside. Theft of valuables from rural homes and livestock and machinery from farms is a major concern. Many farmers and other rural developers are living in fear for their personal safety and the safety of their families. That is why it is so important that it is addressed as a matter of urgency. Farm crimes reported include instances of farm machinery being reported as stolen and vehicle theft. Theft of livestock, including instances of cattle rustling and burglaries and break-ins in farmhouses. We believe that there is a considerable underreporting of rural crime, in particular for the theft of machinery, fuels and other items from farmyards and lesser break-ins in the family home. The increase in the theft of agricultural equipment and livestock can be financially devastating for farmers, who, like all rural developers, are very vulnerable when it comes to criminality. This vulnerability is compounded by geographic and service isolation. It is IFA's contention that rural dwellers and farmers are not at present guaranteed the same level of service and security that applies in urban areas. There is also a requirement for more accurate reporting of crimes committed in rural areas. Currently, all vehicles are recorded on the POLS system as unlawful taking of a vehicle. IFA has called for separate classification of rural crimes to give more accurate account of the problems that exist. Earlier this year, we made a submission to the Policing Authority on the policing plan for 2019, and we set down the key priorities and made recommendations on organisational development and capacity improvement, confronting crime, roads policing and community policing and safety. IFA also presented our proposals to the Commission on the future of policing. Over the last year, several serious incidents have occurred on farms. The quality of crime investigations in such incidents needs to be addressed. Some alarming issues were noted across various districts, such as slow responses, boundary issues, where incidents have occurred within a short distance of a Garda station, maybe a kilometre, and they are passed to a station maybe 22 kilometres away. As a result, culprits and persons of interest were not apprehended. Lack of industry, farming and rural practical knowledge by investigating members was quite apparent during follow-up investigations, and no report back of or incident updates to affected persons. To address these issues and to improve the quality of crime investigation, IFA recommends that An Garda Síochána be given the necessary resources and training on the nature, structure and profile on farming, agriculture and rural life. IFA has offered to assist in supporting the development of a module and recommends that a separate rural farming agriculture unit be included in the recruitment training at the National Garda College. Cross-border crime. Throughout 2017, there continued to be an increase of thefts and livestock, machinery, tools and equipment. Cross-border crimes continue to be a major part of this. Recovered items by An Garda Síochána in Ireland have come from the UK and Northern Ireland. Items stolen in Ireland have been intercepted en route to Northern Ireland. IFA recommends additional support in the form of a more streamlined crime reporting system, immediate sharing of intelligence, information exchange, which would increase the level of visibility and awareness, particularly where agricultural crime has been reported in border areas. IFA believes that greater interagency cross-border cooperation between the Departments of Agriculture, North and South, Customs on both sides of the border, An Garda Síochána and the Policing Service in Northern Ireland, that's the PSNI, would be instrumental in tackling this type of cross-border crime. As we approach Brexit D-Day, there is a requirement for a full review of all operational structures. Should border controls for trade and immigration be introduced, additional resources will be required, such as an increase in manpower, vehicles, aircraft, technological equipment such as CCTV systems for vehicles. In addition, equipment will be required to ensure facial recognition to observe, monitor and manage all border crossings by An Garda Síochána in conjunction with other agencies. The level of sophisticated cybercrime, both in Ireland and internationally, is of great concern to our communities, to all communities. IFA believe it is important for An Garda Síochána to be fully resourced on all aspects of the risks associated with the Department of Agriculture's payment systems, and specifically the increased volume of farm business now being carried out online. Crime prevention. IFA has been proactive in the area of crime prevention in joint initiatives with An Garda Síochána, such as Crime Stoppers, Community Text Alerts and Theft Stop. IFA recommends that An Garda Síochána engage with rural communities more frequently to promote a greater awareness of crime prevention. That that there would be a national and local communications plan using TV, radio and print to demonstrate crime preventative measures, give updates on current crime trends and highlight successful preventions, convictions and prosecutions. Continued engagement with communities through meetings, events and roller shows. Preventing criminals the use of roads. There is a major requirement for the development of a national strategy around community visibility and supports available to local communities. The recent success of operations known as TAR has proved that intense patrolling of national primary routes is vital in the fight against crime. The identification of road networks used by criminal elements and the ease by which they can travel from city to city in short periods must be curtailed. IFA recommends greater use of community CCTV schemes supported by the Department of Justice, which would give Donnghaile Síochána greater coverage of specific areas. Remote visual monitoring and in-station viewing must be effective tools in combating crime. Garda visibility. The lack of Garda presence, patrols in certain communities is affecting public confidence. IFA's network of 946 branches have made it known that Garda visibility, or lack of, is a worrying fact in rural Ireland. There is a need for greater patrolling of rural Ireland. Farmers need to see greater presence on Garda Síochána on the road. IFA proposes the deployment of additional resources in terms of manpower, vehicles and equipment. This can be achieved by increasing the Garda Reserve to achieve greater community engagement, thereby supporting Garda Síochána with local involvement and assistance in the overall community policing plan. In the UK, the various constabularies have exactly the same rural crime issues as we have here in Ireland. To address this, a small but very effective rural crime task force has been established within the police forces to tackle specific issues. The National Farmers Union has been actively engaged at community level in supporting this initiative by assisting the task force with intelligence and reporting of suspicious activities. Chairman, today I am calling for the support of the committee to establish a similar type of Garda operation to tackle rural crime in Ireland, which would provide for additional Garda presence and resources in rural communities, the targeting of criminal gangs operating in rural communities, the review of sentencing for rural crimes and repeat offenders, a review of bail conditions for repeat offenders, a review of Garda divisional boundaries, and a national Garda policy on criminal lurching and trespass. Chairman, IFA will continue to campaign for support from elected representatives and government to protect rural dwellers and businesses. Today, we are seeking further engagement from this committee on IFA's activities on rural crime prevention, together with your support for IFA's initiatives in this area. We look forward to a constructive discussion with you.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Have you something to add to that, Mr. Kerry?
Not at present.
Not at present. Fine. Okay, we're going to open it up now to members to offer. Jim, you're the first, Deputy O'Callaghan. If you'd like to take lead, please.
Yeah. Thanks, Chairman, and thanks, Richard and Barry, for coming in. You know, it's very important to hear from you for the purpose of what this committee is trying to do. We're trying to formulate a report dealing with the whole issue of community policing and rural crime. Can I just ask you at the outset, in terms of the CCTV scheme, that's a relatively new scheme that's been introduced by the Department of Justice, but a lot of local community groups I've spoken to have found it very complicated in terms of trying to apply for funding under it. What's your own assessment of the scheme and whether or not it needs to be tweaked?
Chairman, thank you, Deputy Cullen. Yes, the complication in relation to the administration behind the scheme has been a block in some of it, and in other words, it's taken quite a long time. The fact that that certain local councils have been asked to be the administrators for the information supplied to that, there's been several delays in it, and the take-up by communities has been quite slow. And then the issues of raising funds to support the process after the system has been put in place has been a block.
In terms of, Richard mentioned the whole issue of Garda visibility and the lack of it in rural areas. I can tell you, you probably haven't read the disclosures report, but in it Mr Justice Charlton talks about the lack of Garda visibility in urban areas as well, so it's an issue throughout the country. Like, from the IFA's point of view, would you prefer to see more the Garda stations retained, or do you want to see more mobile Gardaí? Because I suppose it's not feasible for Gardaí to be walking country roads in the same way as you'd expect them to walk city streets. So how would you like visibility to manifest itself?
We would like to see more patrolling, but in Garda cars around the countryside. It's amazing. The drop-off in patrolling and visibility has been amazing over the last number of years. There was a time when I was involved in Markhanaferma when I used to be dodging around the villages coming home at night because there were so many guards around, and I can drive thousands of kilometres now and I don't meet a guard. And I don't know which, I know now which was worse. I would much prefer to meet him. It is got that bad. So we're just looking for visibility, community, so that it is imperative, I think. And look, I take your point about, we need more guards, whether it is urban or rural. But we certainly in rural areas, we need more visibility in terms of patrol cars, I would say, and a bit of, local knowledge. Before guards lived in the community, and they were, and that's gone, and there's no point in going back there. We're not wishing to go back there, but what we do need is more visibility in terms of guard presence, maybe at community events. It's amazing now that community events are being held, and you nearly have to pay the guards to come, for community events, and that is. Look, that's going the wrong way. I think we need it to come the other way. We need Garda visibility, and whether that's in community centres or wherever, I think where people gather, and guards need to be intermingling. And I've seen firsthand the success of community guards in urban areas. I've seen it firsthand, and it is wonderful the way it can work.
Okay, like, would Gardaí know who their local? Would farmers know who their local Garda is in the same way as they'd know who their local TD is?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. So maybe Gardaí need to just make themselves more aware and.
And look, I suppose, like everything else, we have a new commissioner and there's a new culture now. We hope and things will improve. So that people, guards, there will be more guards, I hope.
Yeah.
And that will help. If they get out onto the countryside, people would be very willing to meet them and give them information. But they have to be visible.
Obviously, policymakers need to have evidence to make decisions in terms of changing laws. Have you done any research on the instance of crime in rural areas? Because obviously crime statistics can be inaccurate or misleading. Has the IFA done anything about doing research to show what's the current state of it?
Well, I suppose I'd be coming on from an anecdotal, there's no doubt there's an increase. No, figures are figures, and the underreporting is a major issue because people feel that there's no point in it. So, Barry, maybe you have some figures.
IFA has not conducted a survey. However, we have 946 branches nationwide in every community, and the attitude is that there's certainly an increase in activity of rural crime activity and the lack of Garda visibility in those specific areas.
Okay. Just a point from my own point to you. I think it might be worthwhile if you had the resources to do research. Sometimes policymakers can be driven by empirical evidence, and if we have it and it's there, you can make a much stronger case in respect of the whole issue. It's a matter for yourself, but that's just my own assessment of it. In terms of protecting farmyard machinery, I remember a number of years ago the IFA had a project whereby they were trying to get farmers to stamp their farmyard machinery. Is that ongoing, or what are we doing about that?
The project was called Theft Stop. It's still in operation, and it's primarily a property marking scheme in which people would log into the IFA, be given a unique number, get a stencil, a specific paint that can't be painted over, and overt marking was the theme of it. And again, if you lived in, say, Offaly, you would get an OY, like registration plate numbers, a specific number, and as I said, spray paint and a marking kit to itemise each specific one and then upload it so a record could be kept. A gate sign then also gave knowledge to say that every piece of equipment on this farm is marked, and it was and is a great deterrent. 18 months ago there was a National Property Recovery Day. The Garda Síochána had recovered 500 items plus. They put them on public display. We sent out almost 4,000 text messages to affected members in various counties, and those particular schemes have worked for people to recover their property, but we need to engage more, and we're constantly looking at modernisation and what's currently into the future of property marking. But the big thing is that the criminals are looking for items to get rid of either online or at marts, etc., or car boot sales, and get rid of these items. So if it's marked, they don't want it, and this is the scheme that we've been engaged
so it
with.
sounds like it would be quite an effective measure.
It has proved to be quite effective in many areas.
Yeah, and finally, like, is there a problem with other people or other farmers buying goods at boot sales where they know probably that the goods have been stolen?
Well, I wouldn't say they know that the goods have been stolen, but when
they're not too worried.
We have a mantra when we're out. I'm engaged in every county giving advice at public meetings, etc., on crime prevention, and you know, we encourage people not to buy items. If you know that it's worth 500 and you're buying it for 50, it didn't fall off the back of a lorry, and you know, we're creating a market, and that's the IFA mantra has been saying, if we buy something at very cheaply, we are encouraging this particular type of activity.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Caoláin. Next is Deputy Mick Wallace. If others would like to indicate, please. Deputy
Thanks.
Mick Wallace.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Chair, and thanks very much for coming in. Richard, one of the first things you were talking about was, for example, you made an example of a crime incident where it happened about a kilometre or so from a Garda station, but it ended up that some Garda station 22 kilometres away were dealing with it. Did you seek an explanation as to why this was the case from Garda Síochána?
We did, and it is one of the most frustrating, if I was to come in with one item today, that is one of the most frustrating things of all, is that we've quite recently, you know, so we have brought that up with the guards. They say that is, I suppose it comes back to this house maybe, that there are, this needs to be tackled as a national issue. They tell us that they can't do anything about it themselves. No, it is go on.
The boundaries issue is divisional, and again, you know, you have a rural town and the boundaries here, and suddenly the next Garda station is 22 kilometres away, and they say the investigation of that particular crime falls to that station there, even though it's happened in the last few months and on a regular basis that cars are passing by almost another Garda station to go and investigate it. Now, if it's a serious road accident, I think that eliminates that particular process, but for normal investigations, they stick to the boundaries. For detective unit out of such a division will investigate it in their division, and they say that, you know, it affects investigations. But again, the impracticality, I think there is a system coming on screen where, a bit like your Uber or your type of taxi thing, nearest car to the incident will come on stream. But at the moment in time, boundaries in every division, in every county, is an issue, particularly where it's close to the border of the next division. Who'll do it? And it's a burning problem, Deputy.
It's the biggest issue that we've come across now, and the most frustrating, where a guy has.
Now you're saying that there's a new scheme coming in or whatever. Obviously, we can look into that, but obviously you're calling for more flexibility anyway around.
Absolutely.
Quite recently, there was a helicopter in the sky. There were armed support units out after a particular group, and local community saw individuals on the road who were involved in the suspected of being involved in it, and they phoned up the Garda station. Oh, it's not our area. What helicopter? What car? And then suddenly, within half an hour, there was a phone call back. Where did these people go? Well, they're gone. And the culprits were gone missing, and the vehicles were found quite close to the scene. But again, that became an issue that one side of the system is investigating heavily with air support and armed units, and suddenly the local guard station didn't know anything about it. So that became a boundary issue also.
Would you say, in terms of perception, would you say that most of the criminal gangs, would you say that they're actually from the country area, or would you say they're coming from the big cities?
Well, it appears that they're coming from outside. You know, the areas, they're travelling to areas. They're not usually people within the area. Where they're coming from now, to be deputy, we have to say where they're coming from, but they're definitely travelling, and they're not from the local areas. That's what we found. I think that would be fair enough to say.
Right. Richard, you were talking about livestock theft, and especially around the border area. Is there more animals moving north or moving south?
It's normally moving north. I think that's where well, I mean, they're the people that we hear from. We wouldn't hear from the people coming in from the right. So it's moving. That's what we suspect.
Right, but I mean, more than likely there is animals moving south as well.
No, there could be.
It would be strange if it was.
Well, there could be.
Yeah.
We don't hear when someone gets.
I mean, has there been? I mean, the whole notion that when you buy stolen property, you're actually stealing from yourself. I mean, would there be much emphasis on that from your organisation with your members? Because it's obviously you can't sell stolen cattle unless you find a buyer.
That is true, obviously, but in any group, I suppose there's criminality. There's a small percentage of people. In the main, we would. Look, absolutely, you wouldn't want anybody to be buying stolen property, and we would counsel against that. Absolutely, you know.
Yeah. You talk about the lack of visibility and presence of An Garda Síochána, and as Jim says, it isn't confined to the countryside. I was robbed 25 times in 1 year in Dublin on the streets when I was working with Dublin City Council. We had exactly 25 robberies, and none of it was recovered. So there's plenty of there's every bit as much in the city, if not more. But I mean, obviously there is going to be an increase in Garda numbers, which will obviously help. But at the same time, have the IFA looked at? I'm not talking about vigilante groups, which I disagree with very strongly, but have the IFA looked at the idea of more communication between themselves in terms of suspicious movements of people that they might suspect of being potential criminals?
And look, I agree with you with the vigilante groups. We don't want to go there, but we would be very much involved in text alerts around the country and community alerts. All our members would be involved in those community activities, and we would have close cooperation with An Garda Síochána, and from that point of view, it would be part of the community now, Deputy, as not just ourselves, that we would, in any community, you would have farmers and ordinary people that live in the community, part of text alert groups or community alert groups. And that's, you know, and obviously there's ongoing surveillance of suspicious movements.
Right. If you were told by An Garda Síochána that there wasn't enough funding available to increase the actual Garda numbers, that you would like that the actual numbers that work in your community isn't going to change, given the existing numbers, what would be your number one request of An Garda Síochána?
Well, I'd want a patrol car. You know, I think that's critical for every guard should have access to a patrol car so that they can drive around. You know, bicycles are no good, or staying in the village is no good. That would be. I don't, and to be honest about it, I don't think that the countryside can be policed with this, you know, unless the number of guards is increased. And I mean, for every batch of guards that come out in Templemore, probably only half of them is an increase, because probably the other half is replacing people that have retired. So, but we do need, but it's critically important that if we ring the local, wherever it is, the local town for the Garda station, that we're not told, oh, we can't go out because we have no car. And that is one that's happening all the time.
Yeah, well, we had 2 members of Garda Síochána in here last week, and we had someone in from the PSNI, and one strong theme that came out of it was that funding for Garda Síochána is a political choice, and given that you say there's not enough numbers, and I don't disagree with you, do you not think that the IFA should use more influence? I mean, you are the most influential and I would say the strongest organisation on this island in terms of your ability to lobby the government. Have you looked at actually putting pressure on the government, because they're the ones, it isn't the Garda Síochána who decide how much numbers they have in your community. It's actually, it's down to the funding that the government allot to it. So how much have you pressured the government into actually increasing Garda presence in your areas?
We will be lobbying on an ongoing basis, even at national and local level. And every time, you know, that see a lot of these crimes, particularly violent crimes in the community, they just don't affect the people that are actually attacked. They affect all the people that fear crime, and you know, and make people very uncomfortable in their own homes. And that's highlighted with our politicians on an ongoing basis, you know, at government level. And I mean, it is encouraging to see that there is an increase in numbers, but that does need to go up. But the resources, as much as anything else, Deputy, do need to be given to them. And we understand that, and we have spoken with the Garda Síochána on numerous occasions, and we've, you know, to be fair, we have a good relationship with Garda Síochána, and we, you know, we're on an ongoing basis trying to get them to work their what resources they have to the maximum of its ability, and also with the government. But we do work on it, and we'll continue to work on it.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Wallace. And the next indication was from Senator Niall Donnghaile, please.
Cardi. Thanks, gentlemen. And firstly, apologies for missing the first part of your presentation there. So you may have covered this. As Mick said, we had a presentation last week from members of the Gardaí and the PSNI. And I'm just wondering in terms, because obviously on both sides there's a lot of farms that either straddle the border, there's some farming land that crosses the border, as we know, as well as a whole range of other businesses. So I'm wondering if there's been any collaborative work with the Ulster Farmers Union and some of the farmers there to bring the pressure to bear on the PSNI and Gardaí to work collaboratively. Is that something that you would see as a positive thing if both organisations, and we stressed this with them last week, were a bit more joined up in terms of it was awareness raising campaigns, or in terms of collaboratively working to make that kind of policing response happen more effectively? Because you're right, and my experience of policing in an urban context in the north is actually quite similar in terms of the problems you've flagged up about, you know, divisional difference and, you know, different even branches within the PSNI not talking to each other, right, to tackle problems as they appear on the ground. So I wonder if you have explored that kind of work with your colleagues in the UFU, and if you think within the context of what we're looking at, not least given the onset of Brexit and the concerns presenting around any kind of hardening or a different style of policing along the border that none of us want to see. What would be your views on that? Thanks.
Absolutely, our view would be, and we do keep close communication and meet on a regular basis with the Ulster Farmers Union, and we do discuss that issue. Maybe Barry, you'll give a report on.
There is a meeting planned for very early 2019 between UFU. Speaking with his senior Garda officer recently, he asked that we would have a UFU, PSNI and Garda Síochána in relation to cross-border cooperation in relation to the various organisations. Particularly, there's a scheme going on. There's a superintendent at the border level engaged with his counterpart on the opposite side at the moment, and what they're doing is on the latest technology in property marking, and it's a dual community group. Communities on one side of the border and the opposite side working together to create a locality as such that they would have property marking unique to the locations, and thereby reducing the opportunity for either would-be or organised crime in relation to theft. And again, I have been in contact with members in UFU, and as I said, there is a meeting scheduled for early January.
And do you think, in terms of our own work and our study into these issues, that that's something that we should be, you know, supportive of and calling for in terms of strengthening that? Because obviously, I mean, I would argue always that there should be more cross-border work, and there shouldn't be a border at all. But nevertheless, while it's there, it obviously makes sense any day of the week, but given the uncertainty presented by Brexit, and I'm sure for the farming community and rural population, that goes right beyond the issue of policing and community safety. It crosses every aspect of their lives, but because I think the sharper focus brought down on it, there needs to be that kind of collaborative, and may I say, with the greatest respect, it might be worth having that meeting a wee bit earlier than January 2019, given where we are, and if there's any way that we can bolster or assist in that work or in trying to convene some of that collaborative approach, then please do let us know.
Well, I just to reassure you, I mean, that's just one specific meeting, but we have ongoing meetings with the Ulster Farmers Union on various issues, and that's one of the issues. Barry also attended a conference in the UK. You might give a because we all the 4 countries do cooperate on this.
The National Police Chiefs of the UK come together and look at best practices in that, and they had a conference in rural crime back in July, which I attended, and they had established they have exactly the same problems with exactly the same type of crime, and they treat it as organised. The National Farmers Union Mutual, the insurance company, paid out just under 50 million last year for rural crime issues, and this year they had 18 months ago they established a rural crime task force. Small group, dedicated constables and officers in specific areas, and it worked. And they took up the role of community and crime prevention officers, but they were out there giving advice. They were interagency activity where they could phone up. They worked specific weekends. They worked at times when criminal activity was there, and they were able to.
Across the water, is that?
That's in the UK.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but we have been looking. Looking at best practices in other locations, for the United States or wherever the best practice was that could be applied here without huge cost. But again, the best practice, and for example, the latest technologies in property marking, or whatever it is that we can bring into the communities and to IFA members, that's what we've been looking at. But certainly, across the use of drones, I mean, even for looking for affected members of elderly members of the community who would maybe have dementia or Alzheimer's and that, who go missing, and instead of having lots of manpower out looking, they apply drones. They apply drones in the rural crime task force to be able to scan the countryside when specific activities were going on, and this has been quite effective and a cheap and a very effective operation to support membership on the ground.
Okay, finally, Chair, so we should probably be alert to a specific ask coming from yourselves down the line based on that study and the best practice, because what you have referenced there, I think, sounds good, and I think what we'll probably need to look at, without telling McGranny how to suck eggs, is that, you know, there would need to be a dedicated resource and a dedicated unit developed to look at this on a cross-border basis between both the PSNI and Gardaí, given the bespoke arrangement that's going to be necessary as well. So certainly, I'll follow that with interest. Caoimhghín, thanks, Chair. Thanks, gentlemen. Thank you.
Shannon Dorr, and the next to indicate is Senator Francis Black.
Thank you very much. I don't have a huge amount of questions to ask you, but I want to thank you for coming in today. And, you know, I mean, I really hear that this is a huge problem now in rural communities. And, you know, you often see where, you know, elderly people in particular, you know, who are maybe terrorised, just that feeling of having somebody coming in to the area, and it's so isolated, you know, or anybody. I mean, it doesn't have to be elderly. It is quite frightening. It's very scary, and you know, I would imagine that people often, when it happens, if it is their farming stuff that's been robbed, just the idea of people coming onto their farm can be quite scary. And I would imagine that the anxiety, you know, the constant anxiety and fear of maybe coming back, and will they take more, and will there be violence? You know, there's a lot, there's so much involved in it, I would imagine. And as you say, you know, the fear in the community in general, you know, can be very heightened in all of that. I suppose I just wanted to ask you around the violent crimes, you know, has that got a lot more in the last few years? Has there, you know, do you see more violent crimes as well as robberies in the last few years?
Yes, Senator, there is undoubtedly there has been an increase in violence and the severity of the violence. There's no question about that, and that's what makes us so worried. You know, and that's, you know, why we're glad to have the opportunity today, because it is a real worry, and it's worse it's getting, because these people are getting away scot-free, and in many cases, the vast majority of cases, are getting away scot-free, and not alone are the individual people scared themselves, and some people are hurt. We had quite recently, we have had a couple of big incidents in North Dublin, but it's the fear that they generate in the community that is, and it does need. Look, I know the point has been made about the urban crime as well, but look at our and we'd be sympathetic to wherever that type of thing is, because that should not happen. And but it is in an isolated situation where you have no neighbours, maybe for 5 or 6 kilometres or maybe more. It does become, and there is no doubt there are people of us, you know, that have gone maybe to the local towns, maybe, or gone to the nursing home, that need not be there, but for the fear that they have.
And just on, can I just, I mean, I think the idea of the task force is a fantastic idea. You know, I know it's probably a huge ask, but I do think, you know, and I agree with what, you know, Deputy Mick Wallace said there around your power and influence in here, you know, is, you know, you will get listened to, you know, and it's really, I suppose, and you know, I think from your perspective, to sit down and really focus on putting pressure on the powers that be, because I do think they will hear what you have to say, and speaking, you know, on behalf of those people who are living in rural communities, and highlighting, you know, the fear and the anxiety within the farming community, but, you know, the community in general. I think, you know, if there was a clear strategy from your perspective around that, and just really putting a huge amount of pressure, they will listen to you, and they will take on board what you're saying, and use don't underestimate your influence in here. Use that pressure, because it definitely works. And but I just want to say thanks very much for your presentation today.
I know this mightn't be required at all, but Senator, I don't think the IFA need to be told as to the extent of their influence in here. Richard, would you like to answer the Senator, please?
I leave that statement with yourself, but I think, to be fair, it has been made a couple of times. We constantly were under pressure. I thought we were putting on as much as we could, but we'll have to shove it up a bit further.
All right. Are we okay, Senator? Thank you for that, and for that moment as well. Deputy Clare Daly, please.
Just very briefly again, thanks for coming in. I don't have a huge amount of questions, but I do want to acknowledge that it is an important part of our deliberations, which have been going on for a couple of weeks. I suppose I was struck by the contrast between your account at the start and the account that we got from the Gardaí last week. They painted a very different picture, I suppose, than the one that you put forward. I suppose a couple of things in particular, they would have been at pains to say from their perspective that the crimes have been reduced. They were definitely spelling out that they would say that it's far safer to live in a rural community than it is to live in a city in terms of crime figures and all the rest of it. And that while burglaries and that are probably the biggest crime issue, if you like, in a rural area, that actually you're better off living in the countryside. So I want to, I suppose, first of all, to maybe get a comment on that viewpoint which was expressed by them, you know.
Yeah, I would totally disagree with that, and I know our association would totally disagree with that. You know, we're not in here to bash the Gardaí today, and we don't ever do that, but there is no question. But there is an abandonment in rural areas of you know, the Garda force are practically not there. And it is, I couldn't stress enough that that is absolutely not the case. There's a serious situation out there. Hopefully we will get around with increased resources to you know, to make people feel safe living in the countryside. But look, I drive around the countryside, Barry does, all our officers are around the countryside, and constantly we're hearing of people who, you know, would be slow to open the door to you because they're afraid. No, look, I just want to leave the committee under no illusions. This is a very serious issue. And look, we're all hoping now that things will improve, the resources will be put in, and that they'll be used in the best possible way. I think that's all we can do. We will lobby for that, and but I cannot stress enough the seriousness of this issue.
Just in case I didn't explain it right, I don't think in any way the guards were denying that there was a problem or anything, and I certainly didn't want to give that impression. I think as well that they were very clear that the sense of abandonment or the feeling of a lot of citizens, no matter where they live, that there aren't enough guards on the beat or that we don't see the guards, that rings out loud and clear from every area. But what we were grappling was with, in the new sort of era, how do we, with less resources, with Garda stations closed, with a lot more happening on social media, how do the Garda use their resources better? So, I mean, I don't deny what you're saying, that there's a lot of people in the rural area living in fear, and there are in Dublin, but I suppose the point is that they were trying to make is that, well, what is the basis of that fear? Is that fear based on fear itself, or is it based on a rise in crime? And they would say, actually, that there's been a reduction in crime in the rural areas. So while it is the case, absolutely, that people in rural areas are in fear, we shouldn't be, if you like, whipping that up or making it worse than it already is. And could the reason be linked to other forms of isolation and that as well, which would lead you to believe if the problem is just fear and isolation, then good neighbours, more interaction, more life, more community spirit is a way of addressing that fear. If it's more crime, more violence, well then more guards. Did you know the point I'm making? Like, so they were kind of very much saying that actually the type of crime in rural areas, you're safer overall living in a rural area. So.
I can tell you there is no doubt in my mind, and I'm sure of the association, is the vast majority of our members, that it is more unsafe living in rural Ireland now than it was 10 years, 15 years ago. It has not improved. And look, we can go down the road of figures. The bottom line is, people have given up reporting. In many instances, people don't bother reporting, and that's what's happening. And look, I don't want to make it any worse than it is either, and I'd be all for a constructive approach to improve the situation, but I would not want to hear that it is improving. The situation, the attacks have become more violent. There is no question about it.
Why do you think that is the case?
I think people are able to get away with it. You know, they're just able to come and go as they like, and there isn't enough. You know, the Gardaí are not, you know, we haven't enough prosecutions. There's no question about that. And people are not, that is, and hopefully we can improve that. But it isn't, I would not want to leave the committee today under any illusions that things have improved. They haven't improved. And look, we all agree that there's a limited amount of resources. But hopefully there will be an increase, and there is going to be an increase. But best use of resources, and we need the guards to be in the communities. Look, I've said before, there's probably some communities in Ireland that said they wouldn't have seen a guard for 5 years. You know.
Right. Well, okay, Deputy Daly.
Obviously, some people might be happy with that as well. Like, do you know what I mean? It's not that everybody is necessarily clamouring to see them, but absolutely, Garda visibility is a huge issue. No, I just wanted to. It is very interesting to hear the contrast between what the IFA are saying and what the Gardaí were saying, and it'll be very interesting for the committee. It feeds into Jim's point as well about, I suppose, research and figures and numbers. And while we're all a bit sceptical of Garda numbers for obvious reasons over the past period, based on, you know, and you're right that some people don't bother reporting for sure. At the same time, I suppose a scientific basis for decision making or a research basis has to be there as well. And I suppose in that context as well, in terms of the types of crimes, I mean, you've stressed violence, but burglaries, they would say, are obviously a huge issue. But in terms of the types of crime, do you want to kind of order them or kind of, I don't know?
Well, Barry might fix that now. I just want to make it clear that we, as an association, are picking up our contact now with Gardaí more so than we did in the past, because there is an increase in resources. We see that, and the Gardaí admit that there is, and we're working closely with them to try and improve the situation. And that is it. Barry?
Just on that point, Deputy Daly, we've looked for the reclassification on pulse of various crimes. If you put everything into the one melting pot and it comes out, it doesn't reflect, number one, the location. You might get it by county, but you don't get it that, you know, it's in a rural area. If it happens in an urban town, it happens in an urban town. The capabilities of the system of saying, well, that happened in a rural area, it's a rural crime. If it's a Jeep, there's been a spate of Toyota Land Cruisers have been stolen in the North Dublin, Meath, Louth area over the last period, and from other parts of the country, but not in the same intensity that it's happened. And it goes into unlawful taking of a vehicle, right? Now, if you look at where they're taken from, it's a rural crime, okay? And therefore, by default, if you categorised as a rural crime and show the locations, therefore you have a problem in a specific area and you can put the additional resources that are required into that specific area. Therefore, you will get a far more accurate annual statistic of where the problems are arising if you do that.
All right. Deputy Daly,
Yeah.
you okay?
No, that's interesting. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
good point. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I know that Deputy Wallace wanted to come back in briefly, but is it on that particular matter before I bring Deputy Healy-Rae in, please?
No, I suppose just listening to the conversation between the debate between us there. I suppose obviously I live in the countryside and in the city, and I think definitely the isolation element is a big factor. And if you live in one house on its own with no other house for several hundred metres, without a shadow of a doubt, I agree with you that it's safer living with 10 if there's 10 or more, you know, than in just one. And the isolation agreements, but obviously, I mean, my own mother had an experience a couple of years ago where people actually just came up around the house and actually looked in the kitchen window, and she was there on her own, and they were complete strangers. And they actually went away again. But I mean, obviously, the impact is traumatic, as you can imagine, you know. And there is such the saying that there's safety in numbers. There's merit in it, and it means something. And I do think isolation leaves people very vulnerable. Yeah.
Well, we'll just note that, and thank you for that. I'll bring in Deputy Danny Healy-Rae, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for giving me the opportunity. And first of all, I want to welcome Richard and Barry here. And even though I wasn't here physically in this room since you started, I have been listening to you on the monitor in my own office, and I agree with everything that you have said. And there has been an increase in rural crime, and we all agree where we come from that it's the closing of Garda stations and the visibility and the availability of the local guard that has led to this increase. And you see, we're talking about the Garda car and the squad car or whatever, and that's what we have now, and it's fine where we have it, and it's not fine where we don't have it. But just go back to my own place, Kilgarvan, and the local Garda station at that time, even though there was only one Garda for many years, there was a lot of activity up and down to the Garda station. People knew the Gardaí were around, and the man that was there, there's no problem in mentioning his name, the last Garda was Garda Tom MacDonald, and he was in our parish for about 40 years. And you see, people didn't know when he could land or when he would land, because he was in his own car. and he was around the place, and he was calling to people, he was interacting, he knew what, he had his own sources of information, and he knew everything that was going on in the parish. That's all lost to us now. And if you take a place like Sneem, and they're a half an hour away from Kinmare, they're an hour and a quarter away from Caoláin, and if the car in Kinmare is out, they'll have to ring Caoláin in if something happens. And you see, the criminals now, they have the phone. The phone is helping them, because they know that the fella in Kinmare knows which way the Garda car has gone, and he can ring his fella that's near Sneem or whatever, and Sneem is a sitting duck in, the very same as Oireachtas. Oireachtas is 16 miles from the town of Kinmare. We'll say where the Garda station was, but it's 32 miles away from Castledown Bear. And if the Garda car in Kinmare is out and gone on a task, sure, all the road back to Castledown is wide open, and that's what's happening. And look, I suppose what we need to get across here today, Chairman, is how it affects elderly people when their home is ransacked and broken into. There was two fine gentlemen, very near from where Jim's father came from, very, very near, and their house was broken into on a Sunday while they were at Mass. And they lived all their life, they were very confident and worked hard, and they still work hard. But their confidence is totally shattered because no one has been found for the break-in to their house. There's two other gentlemen lately that were broken into, not too far away from that either, and they won't stay in their own home now at night. They have to go down the road to their niece's house, and they're just not. And the niece's house is so crowded, but their confidence has gone. They won't stay inside that house anymore. So, like, we all hear about the increase of Gardaí, but all worry is that will be to the urban areas that they'll be directed. Just take the man I met the other day. I got home heating oil, he said, and I said, we were wondering. He said to me, will we lock the tank? And we decided, sure, if they're going to take it, they're going to take it. So they're resigned to the fact that their heating oil may be stolen. They'll be lucky if it doesn't before Christmas. And that's what's going on. And you see, sentencing and penalties, that's what's wrong as well. They're not being penalised, and I know that Richard will agree with me. It's so many of the same people, when they are apprehended, have done it before. And they're either out on bail, and it's no bother, they'll get free legal aid. These fellas should be just locked up and throw away the key if they're serial offenders. And that's I have said that in the chamber, Chairman. They have such an effect, and how it affects elderly people when they're broke, and indeed the community around them. And that's what we need. And I'm so thankful for the IFA for sending these two gentlemen in here today. And I don't agree that with Deputy Daly that we're whipping up fear or anything like that, because we don't have to do that. People in rural areas are suffering because of the cutting down of the numbers of Gardaí that are available in rural places. And you see, we're looking for an extra car in Kinmare, but that's not good enough, because in Kinmare and in Kilgavin and Sneem and Oireachtas, you had a Garda there with his own car, and that's not happening anymore. And the criminals know just too well where everyone is, and they're able to pounce in when they know the Guardian duty are gone another direction.
Deputy
and thank you, Chairman.
No,
Chair, could we just correct?
Yes,
I didn't accuse anybody of whipping up fear. What I said was that we had to be careful not to do that. Obviously, I totally recognise that the fear is real, that the isolation is real, that's totally obvious, but that we shouldn't be adding to it. We should be dealing with it accurately and in all its reality, and it is a reality. That's the only point I'm making. I wasn't accusing the IFA or the Guards or anybody of doing that.
Well, just with in mind that I know that you have another engagement and we have ICSA waiting outside, I just wanted to ask a last couple of questions to be able to release you on your way. We've noted you've drawn attention to, you know, the different issues in terms of particular classification of rural crimes. I think, Barry, you've got that message across very, very strongly. The boundary issues, which I think is an interesting insight that you've shone a light on here, and I thank you for that. You know, this is information that ye would glean from your respective members and those you represent. It hasn't always filtered its way through in terms of our elected experience, but I think it was very helpful that you've raised that here today. In relation to cross-border cooperation between, you mentioned, departments of agriculture, customs, the respective police services and Garda Síochána and the PSNI, just in relation to the whole issue of text alert, which plays an important part of rural Ireland's response to a perceived threat or something that has happened. Is there a cross-border link-up? You know, you've mentioned about the various agencies, but at a community level, you know, we have text alert on this side of the border. There is a corresponding system north of the border. Is there a link-up at all? Have ye explored that in terms of your engagement with the Ulster Farmers Association? Would you like to just maybe make a comment on that, Barry, please?
Thank you, Chairman. In relation to that, there is a scheme going on between Garda Síochána and the PSNI at this moment in time, which involves members of IFA and communities in the border areas coming together and actually, as you've mentioned, texting alert. There's a pilot scheme, I'm told, I haven't witnessed it, I'm told there's a pilot scheme going on at the moment between cross-border communities to alert them that there's a rural crime or an urban crime or cattle rustling or vehicle thefts gone on in the area, and apparently it is working and it may roll out across other areas. But it's a small project at this moment in time, but it is being looked at.
You did, thank you for that, you did reflect, Richard, in your opening address that there has been a significant recovery of goods stolen south of the border, north of the border. There was a further incident of that only in the past fortnight. You know, that traffic of stolen goods, farm equipment, etc., and other trades equipment. The texting situation, you think, will be complementary in terms of the respective police services' awareness and being able to intervene to either prevent or apprehend, as the case might be. I think it's very, very important because it is a particular crime focused on the border counties and border communities. Would you like to add any other comment on that, Barry?
We have greatly encouraged the membership to be involved in particularly community engagement and community support for the various police forces and Garda Síochána to give information as quickly as possible. We have a pilot scheme going at the moment in a WhatsApp group out in a specific area that has seen specific levels of crime, both in violent crime and in vehicle theft, in trespass, in those particular items, and it has worked out very good that the Garda Síochána are getting real-time information in relation to the events. But the texting alert in communities has been quite good, but we must have a refocus on it and encourage more members to be involved, more online reporting, real-time reporting, but it has worked, Chairman, very well.
I concur, and I also echo what you've said. I think that the full potential has not yet been properly realised. If I could, just before going to a last question, I represent a significant rural constituency. In fact, I think geographically, from the far west of County Cavan to the closest point to the Irish Sea in County Monaghan, it's probably one of the largest, if not the largest, geographic constituencies, Cavan Monaghan, anywhere in the country. I absolutely recognise the issue of fear. I am conscious and aware of it in terms of people who have contacted me, who have spoken of this reality in their daily lives. It's very, very distressing. The visibility, I totally concur with you, Richard. Visibility is hugely important. Of course, I go back to the words prevention is the first and foremost wish and hope of everybody in relation to all of this. Detection, therefore. But Barry, in relation to your singling out the specific areas in response to Deputy Daly regarding high-spec vehicle theft in a given catchment, what we need to avoid is, putting limited resources into one given area, which in the end of the day might only be creating displacement in terms of the activities of those we want to prevent being involved in these activities. So it's resourcing, and a significant increase in resourcing, that is, in my view, a part of the answer to all of this.
And just clarify that particular piece where I said the statistics in relation to the crimes committed in specific areas, and again it was on the pulse system and the recording of the crimes in specific areas. What I wanted to clarify is that if you know there are crimes in specific areas, then you can put not full-time resources in, but you identify the area that it's occurred in and where it has been identified by criminal elements as being a vulnerable area, and therefore you can put the resources into it, but not a full-time resource, but as I said, active patrolling and in active investigations into the specific areas. And in relation to the high-profile vehicles, the cross-border issues that we've mentioned, both in the Brexit and in theft, and that the PSNI had a very big recovery in the last few days of a number of vehicles that were stolen in the Republic, and the gangs that have been organised between north and south, they're stolen in the Republic, but they were going north of the border, and there are other issues in relation to that ongoing at this moment in time. But just to clarify, not shoving all the resources into one location, but identifying the locations through accurate reporting as to where they're occurring.
Right. Well, just a comment, I'm not going to go into it, and then I have a last question. I note under the opening address, Brexit preparedness, I have to say, Richard, that the vista that you spell out in terms of that, I hope, I pray, that never, ever presents. And I'm taking it that the employment of the scenario that you're suggesting is an address to more than this committee, that we need to make damn sure that that's not the reality that we face, not only as border communities, but on the island of Ireland, full stop. Anyway, the last question I want to ask is in relation to mandatory sentencing. And I wonder, in relation to burglary, have IFA got a specific view in relation to mandatory sentencing in relation to first offence, repeat offenders, recidivism? Would you give me a view, have you got a view as an organisation in relation to the role that perhaps mandatory sentencing might play?
Whether it's a full AFA view or not, but the call that, it be all of those issues that be examined, the sentencing for rural crimes and repeat offenders, it just appears from media reporting and from various incidents that the same people are walking through the door, and what we've looked for is saying, look, if somebody's out on bail and they repeat offend, then they go back in. I mean, that's the norm, I believe, which should occur. But again, there's a constant revolving door at certain times. It doesn't give community great confidence that the system is working when people who have been involved in repeat offending go before the system and, for whatever reason, come out the other side and are back in the community in a very short period of time, or almost immediately.
I want to thank you very much indeed for your responses. On behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank IFA, Richard Kennedy and Barry Carey, to thank you both for being with us here this morning. I think I'll also record my thanks to Elaine Farrell, who is in the visitors' gallery, and to extend our regrets that President Joe Healy wasn't able to join us this morning. But I can certainly, and you can say that you both represented the organisation very well indeed, and thank you for that. So we shall suspend for a couple of minutes to facilitate the arrival of the ICSA, but we're going to have a group picture with you all before you leave, and with ICSA before they come in, just in case I lose any of you during the rest of the morning. We're suspended for a couple of minutes. Thank you. Session. And I want to, on behalf of the committee, extend a warm welcome to the representatives of the Irish Cattle and Sheep Farmers Association, Mr. Seamus Sherlock, the Rural Development Chairperson, and Ms. Laura Starnes, who is the Operations Manager. You're both very welcome indeed, and I want to thank you both for your patience. Our sessions ran on a little longer earlier, and here we are. But you're both very, very welcome. And I will be inviting you to make your opening statement before opening it up to members to comment on and put questions. But first I have to give you the privilege reminder. Please note that you are protected by absolute privilege in respect of the evidence you are to give to the committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you were asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise or make charges against any person or persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him or it identifiable. Before inviting Seamus, Mr. Sherlock, to make an opening statement, I think, is not the order. Can I just remind everyone to please ensure that their phones are switched off? I now invite Mr. Sherlock to make the opening statement on behalf of ICSA. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, for the invitation to this meeting of the Joint Oireachtas Justice and Equality Committee. We welcome the opportunity to engage with you on the topic of community policing and rural crime. There is no doubt that many in rural communities are living in fear of violent assault and crime. Many more are frustrated at the level of theft of property in isolated rural locations. There is a sense that the Gardaí are under-resourced, leaving rural communities vulnerable. Worse, there is a sense that criminals are operating with impunity. They rarely get caught because the resources to investigate are too scarce, and when they do, the justice system seems to bend over backwards to be lenient. Last year, ICSA, in conjunction with Waterford Institute of Technology, published a series of reports on agricultural crime. The reports were authorised by Dr. Kathleen Moore-Walsh and Louise Walsh of Waterford Institute of Technology. The reports were based on a survey of 861 farmers across Ireland, and it makes for stark reading. The farmers were surveyed in late 2016. The first report outlined the following findings. Of the 861 respondents, 66% had experienced some form of crime which impacted on them and their farms. 41% of respondents had been the victim of a crime more than once. While theft, vandalism and criminal damage were the most prevalent types of crime, 5% experienced criminal assault, which in actual terms was 76 cases. The second report quantified the average value of the theft on farms at €1,818, and that incidents of vandalism and criminal damage cost the farmer on average €360. This report also highlighted the fact that significant levels of agricultural crime does not get reported to insurance companies. 94 incidents of theft and 348 incidents of vandalism, criminal damage or trespass were not reported to insurance companies. This reflects the fact that the cost of claim against your own insurance is perceived as not being worth it due to the fears of higher insurance premiums in the future. However, the third report showed that farmers were also reluctant to report crime to the Gardaí. 45% of respondents did not report an instance of agricultural crime to Gardaí.
The reasons can be summed up as a sense of hopelessness that anything could be done. In fact, the level of recovery of stolen assets were 8% among the respondents. What the ICSA and the WIT report shows is that rural crime is very much underestimated by official figures from An Garda Síochána. It also very much indicates that criminal activity is widespread and the impact is felt by many people in rural Ireland. Farmers are especially vulnerable. While we are all aware of the terrifying ordeals of individuals attacked in their own homes or on their properties, there is a lot less awareness that farmers are regularly intimidated by trespassers on the land. We in the ICSA regularly hear from members about uninvited individuals coming onto their land with lurchers and dogs and with the apparent intention of shooting birds or lamping foxes. However, in reality, many feel that this is just a front to size up the farm and its assets. I don't want to over-dramatise this, but most country people will tell you that they are living in fear of somebody driving in, or in fear of being attacked in their own homes in the middle of the night. There is no doubt that people feel that Gardaí have inadequate resources. The problem is not so much the closure of Garda stations, but the time that it takes to get a squad car out if something goes wrong. The feeling among many is that it is better to call your neighbour than to call the Gardaí when you feel threatened. Many farmers are spending money trying to make their premises more secure. However, solutions are not cheap for individual farm families. A number of communities have come together to install CCTV cameras. There is a scheme to grant aid to this kind of initiative, but so far the uptake has been very low. A real problem seems to be that the communities have to do a lot of fundraising to provide matching funds, and there is also an ongoing cost. ICSA also encourages farmers to mark their vehicles and farm machinery. There is a number of ways of doing this so that a stolen vehicle can be identified, but it is not obvious to thieves when they are stealing it. However, there is no substitute for having Gardaí on the ground. We need local communities to be on a first-name term basis with the local Garda. ICSA is concerned that restrictions on Garda overtime is impacting the ability to fight crime and to be on the case rapidly. We want to see a higher Garda presence in rural areas and the ability to respond to calls to help as fast as possible. ICSA is also concerned that criminals who continuously reoffend get treated too lightly by the criminal justice system. All too often, we see crime committed by individuals who should be in jail. We want to see stiffer sentencing for repeat offenders. The purpose of the criminal justice system should also be about protecting innocent people in their homes. And if there is one message I want to get across loud and clear, it is that rural crime continues to be a major issue. I think the ICSA reports show that we should not assume that Garda figures on crime tell the whole story. People in rural Ireland are living in fear, and it is time to prioritise the fight against crime. It is time to deliver enough resources to the Gardaí, and it's time to crack down on reoffending. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sherlock. And now open it up to members. I just need to explain that the Minister for Justice is taking questions in the Dáil chamber. Some members may, as some have already done, had to leave to go to the chamber and hopefully will be able to return. Deputy Mick Wallace, please.
Thanks, and thanks for coming in. Just to pick up on a couple of the points you're making. You say that more often than not, it makes more sense to ring your neighbour than to ring the guard. And I can see where that's coming from, and I agree. But do you not think that emphasises, though, why? I mean, and I come from the countryside as well. Do you not think that communities need to build more communication among themselves, more of a community spirit, spend more time together, work together more, and that actually, if you have real strong communities that engage, I think, from my experience of life, I think that actually will fight the challenges of crime more than anything the guards can do. You're never going to get the numbers that you'd like in terms of course, there should be greater presence of the guards in the countryside. But as we said in the earlier session, that's a political decision that's made as to how much funding we give on Garda Síochána. But in the absence of sufficient funding from the state to how we fund policing, should there not be greater efforts put in to actually building stronger communities? Because that isolation that we're all talking about, you have less isolation when there's more communication between people living in rural areas. And I notice in northern Italy, there's far more community spirit, and all the old people spend much more time together, and there's much more of coming together to talk, go for the coffee. They know each other well. They see each other every day. There is more isolation in Ireland, but we're probably do not think we can do a lot more to address that isolation by, and organisations like yourselves and like the IFA. Obviously, other organisations need to be working on it as well. But every organisation has the potential to have an impact in this area.
Yeah. Actually, we agree, because we in the ICSA, we hold meetings all over rural Ireland. We have a county executive in every county. We have 4 representatives in every county, and every year we hold meetings in every county. I've been all over. I've been in every county in Ireland speaking at meetings, and we encourage communities to come together. We have always encouraged communities to come together. I deal with a lot of older people in rural Ireland, and I always make sure that they have their closest few neighbours' numbers on their phone. Yes, ring the Gardaí when there's a problem, but ring your neighbours as well. There's a lot of parts of rural Ireland, as you well know, the Gardaí could be 40 minutes away, and 40 minutes would be a horrendous time for any elderly person to be in a house terrified that they're going to be beaten up. So we've always looked for community. We've always asked for community policing. You know, it's not that long ago that every community had a Garda. We knew that Garda by name, and that Garda worked extra hours, usually was never really off duty, even if they were training the local soccer team or the hurling team. They were always keeping one eye on the community. They knew who should be in the community, but more importantly, they knew who shouldn't be in the community. But we have, we've continuously, and there's another thing, Mick, every farmer now, everybody in rural Ireland has a phone, everybody has a camera on that phone. And as I always say to people, it's not easy to have a biro to write down a number of a car and acting suspiciously, but everybody has a phone. Whip out the phone and take a picture of that van or whatever, and you'd never know. That could be invaluable for the Gardaí later on that evening or the next day, God forbid, if there was something happened in the community. It's all about communities. Yes, we agree 100% with you. It's all about communities. And by the way, it's not about knocking the guards either. In fairness to a lot of rural Gardaí, they work tremendous. They do everything possible, but the problem is they're being pulled left, right and centre. And the biggest problem, I believe, and ICSA believe, a lot of these rural Gardaí are spending too much time sitting behind a desk. And they'll tell you that themselves. They want to be out. They want to be patrolling. They want to be out looking after our elderly and our most vulnerable. But they are spending huge amounts of time on a computer behind a desk. They're being asked to go to court sittings, inquests, all that kind of thing. They are things we believe that should be cut out of the Gardaí altogether and let the Gardaí do the job they signed up for.
And just in relation to what you were saying about community groups, I mean, I can speak personally about this. I come from Laois, and I think the single best thing that happened to our community was developing our community alert group and all the fundraising that went into it. We have the camera system as well, and I would say that all of the work that went into getting that system up and running brought the community, 157 families in the group got together, and we met regularly at fundraisers and at meetings, etc. And that, I found, was probably the best way of getting to know our greater community. But there's an issue now in terms of the new scheme that's available to fund the CCTV communities.
And there are 3 specifically in Laois who have already carried out quite a bit of fundraising, and that has been fantastic for the community. They've been reaching out, they've been visiting people, rallying together and coming out to support the various events. But they're being held up now because there's a delay in trying to get the scheme fulfilled and getting authority on the funding for it. And that seems to be a shame because it's actually breaking down. You get a community together and then they're having to hang back a bit as they're waiting for the CC community alert funding to be available and to get the approval, you know. So I couldn't agree more. Community is excellent, and I think that the community alert really supports that. But there seems to be issues with that at the moment.
But you raised the point, you think that sentencing should be increased, but if you look at the international research in that area, increasing sentencing doesn't reduce how they behave. And what research does show, though, that the majority of people who engage in crime are people who have fallen through the cracks, and we actually need to be spending more in making sure that people don't fall through the cracks, rather than as one of the former deputies said here in the last session, locking them up and throwing away the key. I mean, preventing further crime, do you not think putting more resources into making sure that they don't fall through the cracks would certainly be a help, whether it's rural or urban?
Yes, we would agree, but in fairness, you know, it's very disheartening for a member of the rural community who has been, God forbid, burgled or whatever, and it turns out that the person that came into their home had maybe 50, 60 previous convictions. And, you know, for a lot of elderly people living alone in rural Ireland, they're petrified, and I can't issue that strong enough now. I'm dealing with people who are absolutely petrified. Men and women, our parents, our grandparents, who, let's face it, worked very hard in tough times to keep this country going. And I think it's an indictment that those men and women are now living in absolute fear. I mean, a lot of these people will not sleep. They'll tell you if the dog barks at night, they're up. They're staring out windows. And it's no way to treat our elderly people and the most vulnerable people in our society, as far as I'm concerned.
I just, probably a little bit different, but have you ever, has there ever been any discussion around the idea that, I mean, for example, in Ireland, our local authorities get only 20% of the average local authority in Europe as funding to actually carry out their work. So what's happened in Ireland is we've actually done away with local government. What we have now is underfunded, weak local administration. We don't have any local government. And I know when you look at Europe and see how they operate, they actually they deal with issues around things like rural crime. They deal with it through the local communes, local authorities, and they're involved in it. And I'm just wondering, it's probably not something that's talked about a lot, but would you consider the idea that if the local authorities were much stronger than they are in Ireland, could it be a help in actually improving how our communities manage to get by?
Well, look, anything that will help is a positive thing. And I think local authorities should be more involved. Everybody needs, this is a real community problem, and the community is what will solve this problem as far as we're concerned in ICSA. We need everybody in rural Ireland. Now, we appreciate it's not just a rural problem, crime, but we're coming from rural Ireland and we're representing the rural folks. We believe everybody needs to sit down and work on this together. I'll repeat myself, Mr. Chairman. It's absolutely shocking. I speak at meetings. I was in Clare, West Clare, not that long ago, and I met men in their probably late 60s, early 70s, who came to the meeting, and all they wanted to talk about was crime. And those men were facing home to lonely homes, nobody living in it, facing in the dark, down a boreen, as they said themselves, not really sure whether they'd ever make it to the house or not. And again, I have to say, I think that's a shocking way to have to live, a very sad statistic in rural Ireland. And a lot of these men and women actually feel forgotten. That's what they say to me. We're forgotten. They don't care about us. We're no asset to the community anymore. But that's very wrong. They are a huge asset. They are the men and women that built this country, as far as I'm concerned. And I have to go back to the thing about the neighbours. Yes, you're right, we have to call the Gardaí, but the neighbour will be there quick. I know myself, I'm a farmer. I've often got up at 3 in the morning because my neighbour had a cow calving. You know, so you just jump out of bed and go over and give them a hand. So I'm sure 99.9% of rural Ireland wouldn't mind jumping out of bed if they thought an elderly neighbour or a vulnerable neighbour was on his own or on her own and they were afraid that somebody was outside. We're not for 1 minute thinking anybody should take the law into their own hands. Absolutely not. But I do not believe we can stand by and allow our most vulnerable people suffer in silence.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. And thank you, Deputy Wallace. Deputy Clare Daly, please.
Thanks very much, and thanks a million for coming in. I think it is incredibly useful to us in the project that we're doing, and I mean, in fairness to you and the IFA, you couldn't spell it out strong enough, actually, the fear that people are feeling, and there's no question, and nobody doubts that that fear is totally real. But the question I suppose we need to grapple with is how do you deal with it? And in some ways what seems to be coming out of the discussion is it's as much in some ways an indictment on how we treat older citizens, the erosion of community both in our towns but particularly in our rural areas, as it is about community policing, and that we need to probably join the dots on that, like, you know. So I suppose that's the first thing. I suppose I thought the Waterford study that you quoted was really interesting. I think it is very important that we have, I suppose, facts to inform whatever, you know, needs to be done. And just in terms of the respondents, I mean, clearly if you look at it, 66% of people, it was a crime, it was burglary and that type of issue. Quite a big drop then down to sort of assaults, and we obviously don't want the gap narrowing or anything like that, but how much do you think in terms of a response to the survey that it was because people had been impacted against crime so that then they were more inclined to answer it? Do you know what I mean? And therefore you get the high percentages, or do you know the point I'm making? Like, the very high percentages of people had been the victims of crime. Is that in any way because, well, you'd be more enthused, oh, give me that, I was burgled, I'm going to do that survey, or whatever, do you know what I mean? If you could give us a bit more about the study.
Yeah, that was the case. People who had been victims of crimes were very keen, but it was an online survey that we did, and farmers with an agricultural crime survey, so actually engagement, they're not crazy about going online to fill out surveys. So we were very happy with the amount of respondents that we had. But thankfully it does appear that in terms of assault and those kind of crimes, that they do be at a lesser incidence, but they cause a huge amount of fear in a community. If you've got somebody in a county, for example, who's been assaulted in their own home, that will have a widespread effect on that whole area. So there may not be, you know, there mightn't be as many instances of it, but it would cause a much greater fear factor in a local community.
And I think the way we have to deal with that, I suppose, collectively, just in terms of how we deal with the crime, because, and it is interesting that both groups were looking at mandatory sentencing and increase. We wouldn't generally be in favour of that, just based on the evidence that it doesn't tend to work. But that doesn't mean that it isn't a serious crime for people. Of course it is. But maybe the whole path of, say, restorative justice, or have you analysed that? Like, would it be, in terms of your analysis of who is committing these crimes, like, are they gangs, as in gangs, as I mean a group of people working collectively, targeting this, who have a particular market? You're much more likely, I suppose, to get gang crime in a rural area, in that type of gang crime with a small g, than you would say in an urban area, I think. Or what analysis has been done on that? And in terms of restorative justice, is there a perception amongst people that, well, sure, look, if you're stealing a tractor or whatever, sure, he'll get it back on the insurance, I'm not really doing any harm, and that sometimes the people doing this don't actually realise the devastating blow that their crime can have, even on the financial viability of the farm family, because it's a bit like fellas robbing off their boss, thinking, ah, sure, look, it's not a real crime because they'll get it in the insurance and that kind of stuff, you know. That if they were forced to meet their victims and deal with the damage of what they've done, that actually might impact on their behaviour more. It's just
I suppose the quick answer is, in the farming community, we wouldn't believe that they actually care what harm they're doing, because some of the crimes there, they drive in vans, they'd even approach the farmer and tell him to get out of the way while they're taking what they want, which is, you know, unthinkable behaviour. Bully boys shouting and roaring. And we're talking about vulnerable people here. They seem to always know where to go, where maybe a fella is getting on a bit in age or living alone, or maybe an elderly sister with him. Vulnerable people that have no hope of defending themselves, really and truly. And they're coming in gangs, and raping the place. And I mean, we are now at a stage in rural Ireland where, okay, we don't expect to leave the gate open anymore and to drive straight in. But farmers now have to lock up everything to even go down the fields to cut the bit of hay or to look at the cattle. I know farmers who have come up out of the fields to find guys siphoning the diesel out of their tank, and they're telling Grandad, stay out of the way, we'll be another 5 minutes. You know, and I mean, that man will never again sleep, I don't believe, sound, because once I can't imagine the effect that must have mentally on people that's getting on in age, living, you know, in rural Ireland. They're living in beautiful locations, but they're completely alone, and I can see the fear in their eyes. I mean, I suppose to put it to you simply, we'd have a lot of meetings around rural Ireland, and rural crime wouldn't be on the agenda at all, but it always comes onto the agenda. Somebody will put up their hand and say, listen, Seamus, what can you do about the crime? What can we do about it? It's always put on the agenda on the night. I have rarely gone to a meeting anywhere in rural Ireland in the last 18 months that rural crime hasn't been discussed. And the reason it's been discussed, it's that widespread. People mightn't want to acknowledge that. And to be honest with you, it's not all about stealing either. I mean, illegal dumping is a huge problem. That's a crime as far as we're concerned. I mean, many farmers ring us and said they're after getting 8 or 10 black bags chucked over the hedge, the cattle have opened them up, and now it's blown all over the field. The damage that could do to livestock, the damage it could do to machinery, glass bottles, and trespass. This trespass, where fellas are coming in at night, lamping foxes, or with hounds, chasing hares. They're leaving gates open, letting stock out onto main roads, which is a huge problem. They're damaging property. If the farmer goes out, we've seen the high-profile case in North Dublin, where the farmer went out and asked him to leave, and he got knocked out, allegedly, for his sins. So, I mean, we have a lot of guys who see the lamps going around their fields at night, and they're actually afraid to go out, because they're living alone and they don't know who they're facing. So, as far as we're concerned, that's every bit as much a crime than actually breaking into the house. You know, and Gardaí might say, that's only trespass. You know, but it's a lot more than trespass to the farmer, because he has to go out the next morning and he could have ewes in lamb, he could have cows in calf, and anyone that knows anything about farming knows lights at night terrorise stock. Cattle and cows and that would run through barbed wire fences, get cut up. God forbid you open the gate and let them out onto a main road and kill someone on the road. These are all issues that's facing an already struggling and already hardship-stricken farmer in rural Ireland. These are the calls I'm getting on a weekly basis.
And I think it's really important that you brought that out, and you actually have some, I think, very strong allies from maybe unusual friends, I suppose, in the animal welfare, who have also sided with farmers who are trying to deal with this appalling activity, and would make the point that the Gardaí actually have considerable powers to deal with these issues, even from an animal welfare point of view, but they don't kind of really treat it as a crime at all, and that there's not enough education. And that's something that we raised with the Guards last week. I think it's a really important angle, from the importance of animals to a farm community, but also in terms of the powers that are there that aren't being used, like, you know. So I think you've made that very strong, actually, you know. It's a good one. Just my last point, really, because I have a priority. You're clashing with justice questions with the Minister and world. But just in terms of the CCTV and that, and the success of that, like, has there been much work done on house? I mean, obviously they say if you have an alarm in your house, there's less likely it's a hassle. Is that what it is, or is it more that, has it been a help in prosecutions, or is it just, it's a deterrent?
Well, yes, on both cases. Now, I know in our particular community alert, there was a lot of robberies going around, but in this particular case, the gang came through our area, so they were able to trace it, and that did lead to a prosecution. But the sense of security that a CCTV community alert group brings to an area, I can't stress it enough. And that's also going to help with An Garda Síochána when it comes to the investigation. It'll help on, say, what they would consider to be a minor issue, but significant to a farmer, on the trespass issue. You know, and if there was one thing that we could, you know, impart with you today, is how important it is to sort that whole scheme out. It's so difficult to get. You have to make 2 applications. It's already going to cost you about €2,500 to the community just to apply. It's so slow. We have the county councils clashing with An Garda Síochána as to who's responsible for it. There's an awful lot of money that needs to go into this. But it is so important and so successful, and the more of these we have across the country, the better it'll be for the residents of the country and for crime in general. So I really hope that the whole area of community CCTV gets rectified soon and that we can get on and get these systems up and running.
It's been very practical because we are, I suppose, looking for practical suggestions and that as well. And that point, just it's the last point. It's just in terms of social media and that whole, I suppose, the internet, the phone age, and all of that. In terms of educate, like, do you do education with rural communities on that, or what would you think the older people's use of these devices, or any improvement? Because the guards would have made the point that that's a way in which they have to communicate a lot more now. It's
Look, as I say, we hold meetings regularly all over rural Ireland. You're right, probably the older generation are shy to talk about iPhones or anything, but we encourage them all we can. We have meetings in every county, and we encourage people to bring the guys that's more vulnerable, maybe the guy that's living a bit away from. And we go to a lot of farm markets where the cattle are being sold. You know, most members of ICSA be at markets every week, and we kind of pinpoint who the vulnerable people are. But at the end of the day, we're a farm organisation. But I'd just like to finish on one thing. This, you know, the Gardaí in rural Ireland, and we know many of them, they do a tremendous job. They probably work many, many hours that they don't even get paid for, because they'll tell you to just stay going because they're following up on something. So we have to compliment the Gardaí that's on the ground. There just isn't enough of them, and they're not getting the resources. And could we also say that we encourage every rural dweller to have the neighbours' numbers on their phone. Look, at the end of the day, your neighbours will get there faster on 99% of the time than the Gardaí, and we just have them, you know, two people standing together is better than somebody vulnerable locked in a house. And I know, talking to old people that we have done this with, they are very, very happy, and they can actually sleep at night.
Thank you. All right, Deputy Daly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Frances Black, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I think you've given a very clear and precise picture of what it's like for people who live in rural Ireland. I live in the city myself, but I know, I mean, my cousins are farmers. They live in an island, so they're a little bit more protected from rural crime than anybody else. But in saying all of that, I can only imagine. I mean, the fear thing for me is huge. So Mick was talking earlier around when people came into his mother's home or just looked in the window. So if you just take that example where people came onto the land, looked in the window, in the kitchen, and the fear that starts, and then, if Mick's mother then goes into the town and says there was people, and then all of a sudden fear starts to grow and grow and grow, and even if nothing happens, that anxiety is huge. It's absolutely huge. And all of a sudden then people are closing their doors, and the breakdown of community then, do you know what I mean? People are terrified, and they might connect with each other on phones or on texts and stuff like that, but it isolates people even more, So I know, and it feels like, listening to the two presentations this morning, it feels like it's getting worse and there's not much support out there. And the IFA said earlier that it's actually more and more people are not reporting because nothing's getting done, if it is just, say, regular kind of burglaries where people's, farming equipment is getting things. But the impact of that is huge. And then obviously if you have an elderly man or a man, an ordinary farmer, he doesn't have to be elderly, where he's feeling threatened, God only knows what could happen. If that fear factor comes into it, do you know what I mean? He might react to something that may not actually be the reality. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So it really is a huge, it sounds like it's a huge problem. And they were talking earlier around the Rural Crime Task Force. That's the model in England and what they're doing. And I just want to kind of bring that in. I really want to kind of ask you around preventative models. So what I mean by that is, do you think there is some way of creating or using a model, and I know you use that thing around leash, where you do have that, but do you think that model, for example, really works around prevention? And if not, is there a strategy around prevention and creating an energy of safety within that community where people feel safe? Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, I suppose, first of all, as Mick already said, community. we get the communities to come together. We ask every farmer, every rural dweller now has to be conscious of their own security as well. Unfortunately, we're now at a stage where the gates have to be locked, even if you're only going to the local shop, if there is a local shop anymore. The gates have to be locked all the time. People are literally locking themselves in now. Farmers, I go to a lot of farmers and I have to ring them and say, come out the passage there and open the gate for me. They're locked in. We're actually locking ourselves into our farms. We are conscious that every farmer now has to have a proper shed with a proper steel door that they can put all their valuables into. But I just want to go back to one point you made. I've spoken to many farmers who have noticed when they came home that somebody had been in the yard, something had been moved. Now, maybe nothing was stolen, but the effect that had on them was huge. There was somebody walking around their yard because there was a pitchfork or something left somewhere. You know, fellas remember these things. And a lot of lads said to me, Jesus, Seamus, there was someone in my yard. And there mightn't have been, you know, and the fact that there was someone walking around that yard, would that man get up now at 3 o'clock in the morning if he had cows calving, living alone? A lot of them say no. The chance to cow. They just wouldn't like to face out in case there be someone outside. And again, I have to say, now Laura will talk in a minute about the CCTV thing, but we as an organisation, it's all about community. It's all about working with the local community police, working with the local people. We have no choice at this moment in time. A lot of people feel we're on our own and we have to do the best we can. It's a survival thing now for a lot of older people. A lot of people are saying to me that they hope they can see their days out without being attacked. And again, I have to say, that's very sad. That really affects me, driving home from meetings at night when I see vulnerable people saying, you know, I'm 72 now, Seamus, but geez, I hope I see it out without being beaten up or attacked. And I think that's so sad for our men and women that work so hard on this, in this country and outside the country. Some of them came back. A lot of them might have family, but the family have all moved away. The local post offices are gone, the Garda station is gone. You know, there's parts of rural Ireland where it could be 15 miles to the nearest petrol station, 20 miles. You know, I'm not saying for 1 minute we can ever maybe bring all that back in a hurry, but this is where we're leaving our vulnerable people. This is where our people are finding themselves being left behind. Infrastructure is moving away, everything else is moving away, but the people are still living there. So it's coming down to communities. So you want to talk about CCTV?
Well, actually, I wanted to just go back to what Francis was asking earlier about in relation to the models that they have in the UK. They have Caesar. It seems to be a fantastic system that they use across the UK and across Europe, which is a marking system, and it also acts as a deterrent. And I mean, the wonderful thing about it is that if something goes missing, say, for example, in Northern Ireland, that can be easily traced right across Europe with scanners held by the police. It's a common system. But we don't have it here. Well, it's actually only just recently been introduced, and we've done a little bit of work on that, in that we've negotiated a deal with the company to apply discounts for our members, so it makes it more affordable for them to mark their vehicles. But, and I know and Garda Síochána have welcomed Caesar being introduced, but it does need extra resources. It means extra additional technology for the Gardaí, so that they've got a scanner to read it. But at least if that was the case, to say you've got it as a deterrent and a tracker, and then hopefully we'll be able to recover items. But that's commonplace in the UK and across Europe. But it's not something that we used here. So, you know, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. When it comes to that particular thing, I think that Caesar system in the UK works very, very well, and if we could have it here, I think it would assist.
Just another thing I wanted to ask you around, say, the robberies of the farming equipment, which creates, it's not just robbing farming equipment, it creates unbelievable chaos within a community. But who, like, in your experience, like, who's buying? There's obviously a market for it. So who's buying it? And is there something, I mean, is it other farmers? Is it other, I mean, who is it that's buying this material? Because obviously, I mean, it's shocking to think that there's so much, you know, farming equipment being robbed, and if there's that much being robbed, then there must be somebody buying it. And is there something that you can do as an organisation, along with the IFA, to try and work really hard on getting people to not buy? Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, I suppose, first of all, reports lead us to believe a lot of it is actually leaving the country, the quad bikes and that. Quad bikes are a serious problem. They're being stolen literally on a weekly basis now. Seemingly a lot of them are leaving the country. We would be adamant at any meeting we go to that our members do not purchase equipment off of anybody unless, you know, it's a reputable source. I believe a lot of it is being put into containers and shipped out of the country. Okay, you might say the odd car boot sale, there's bits and pieces in it, but then it comes back to the marking system. You know, Caesar, that company now, you can literally mark your equipment, and anywhere in Europe, that can be scanned, and they can say that's owned by France. You know, that's how simple it works, and we would be encouraging our members to mark their equipment. It probably won't stop it being stolen, but you have a better chance of getting it back. Plus, I have to say that the Gardaí are regularly telling me that they're finding stuff that nobody has reported. They can't give it back. We've often seen it even on the news where they've displayed a couple of hundred items, maybe smaller stuff, drills, that kind of stuff, not really farm machinery, but there's no owner for it. And the problem is some farmers are not marking it, and more farmers are not even admitting that it was stolen. A lot of farmers are saying to me, I look, Seamus, the chainsaws, it was 5 or 6 years old. You look, I'd have a new one bought while I'd be going on about it. But that's not the point. That's feeding into the system as far as we're concerned. These guys are not going around stealing for the sake of it. They're stealing it because they obviously have markets for it. And as far as we're concerned, that's it.
Please.
Just with regard to yourself and IFA, and I'm sure there are other organisations who are very concerned about this, would it be an idea, or would you ever think of kind of, you know, everybody coming together and working together and maybe possibly putting a proposal or a strategy together that ye could, you know, give to the Minister for Justice, for example, and say, look, this is what we're looking for, this is what, I mean, has that ever happened, I suppose, is what I'm asking, and if not, would it be an idea for you to all work together and putting a strategy together, because it's a huge problem, obviously.
Well, we have met the Minister for Justice on a number of occasions, and we've even given him a copy of our report there, the Waterford one. So in fairness to the Minister, he knows exactly where we're coming from. You know, we've been beating this drum a good while, and I know other farm organisations are at the same. So the Minister is well aware, I have to say, I believe, would be very well aware of the situation in rural Ireland. The Gardaí themselves, a lot of ordinary rural Gardaí tell me, you know, they're really at a low ebb over this because, again, I have to repeat myself, they're spending too much of the day sitting on a chair behind a desk. And that's not what they signed up for. Those men and women joined the force to serve and to protect, and that's what they want to do. And I think we should do everything in our power to free them up, give them better resources, and work with the community. The community has to play a big part in this. We cannot expect the Garda to sit outside everyone's house at night to protect us. The community comes first. I've always made it quite simple. The people of rural Ireland should stand with their brothers, stand with their families, shoulder to shoulder, and we will work with the Gardaí to try bring this crime thing down. We're never going to get rid of it, but we'll try to bring it down.
And I think we'd really welcome the opportunity actually to work with you know, the various organisations, Mointon, Atira, etc., to try help come up with solutions. So I think that would be a good idea. I think often partnering up with other organisations and really getting, you know, a huge amount, getting on their toes,
getting people mobilised really, and I think that's when you have more power, and that's when I believe, you know, you will get heard also. So I think that's important.
Thank you, Senator. You mentioned Mointon Atira, Laura. Mointon Atira, one of the groups who've come before us here with Feroiga in the first session just a fortnight ago, and they both made very cogent contributions. Just a couple of last questions, Seamus and Laura. In our engagement with IFA earlier, a number of points came up, and I wonder, just from your own experience, underreporting, is it something that you're conscious of, Seamus, Laura?
Yes, unfortunately, a lot of farmers, if it's a small item, let it be a chainsaw or whatever, they're saying it's not worth the bother, we won't bother the Gardaí, but they're also worried about their insurance claims. A lot of guys are afraid what they'd get back today in one hand, it would be taken off in tenfold over the next few years with the hike. So that's a serious problem in rural Ireland, insurance, how they can afford the insurance if they put in a claim. Okay, if a tractor or a machine was stolen, you'd have to claim for it. But a lot of guys, I think even in our report, we've said they're willing to take a hit of up to maybe, you know, up to €1,800 before they'll put in the insurance, because their insurance could double. You know, so that's underreporting is a big problem, and a lot of people, if they think the Gardaí are overstretched as it is, but we're adamant every crime should be reported. The Gardaí cannot solve it if they don't realise it happened. Plus, every crime that's reported, it's building a kind of a thing for the Gardaí, a case, you know, like-minded crimes, and the Gardaí are adamant, and I'm always adamant on the media, every crime should be reported.
I think that's a very, very important message, and I think maybe I decouple the insurance reporting and the Garda reporting. The first is a choice, it's a decision, but the other, I think, should happen. Because, I mean, the statistics don't then reflect the honest picture. And that's very, very important indeed. And I would hope that IFA and ICSA would each, you know, encourage, through your meetings, engagements across every county, encourage your membership and, you know, to use their influence not only in their own case, but with the rest of the community. This is important. And I have to say, it's also important in terms of making the case for additional resourcing. I mean, the stats that we had shared last week between the Garda Síochána and the PSNI who came before us are indicating a 70% reduction in burglaries. Well, can we have confidence in that figure? That's a question. We can't if it is the case that people are not reporting crime. They should.
We understand from our report that it's actually a lack of confidence in Garda Síochána is what has come back in this study. You know, that there aren't enough, they won't come out quick enough, or the value of the item was too small, or they can't remember exactly what day it was taken. There's actually a number of pretty strong reasons as to why there is underreporting.
Well, even with that confidence issue, I think people should recognise that it's important that it's known.
Yeah, I agree.
Mr. Chairman, there is a perception out there in the farming community that if they do report it, there might be a fear that these individuals would come back. And we certainly are adamant that's not the way it is. We're adamant at every meeting I go to, every single crime must be reported. You have to do your bit. And, you know, we have to remember as well, and Francis said it there, you know, let it be a chainsaw or whatever. That farmer has to replace that. And we're not going to go into the price of beef cattle at the moment, but for beef farmers and sheep farmers, you know, a new chainsaw would actually take a good few cattle to have the profit on a good few cattle to actually have to get one chainsaw. So the cost, you know, the knock-on effect is huge. We have farmers there that are really struggling to replace quad bikes and that. You know, they really are struggling. So it comes down to, and you're right, we are asking everybody in rural Ireland to get together, but more importantly, report every single crime.
Just the last couple of points. IFA, we know, and they developed out our knowledge of it when they came before us a short time ago. Their working relationship cross-border in terms of the Ulster Farmers Association. Do you have a corresponding relationship either with the Ulster Farmers or with another organisation north of the border? And I'm asking that in the context of you know, greater cross-border, cross-community encouragement. We have a significant, it's not just anecdotal, far from it, there's lots of evidence of a significant traffic of stolen goods south of the border going north of the border. Could well be the other way about also. I'm not aware or cognizant of it, but most certainly the south-north traffic is documented. Recent significant find north of the border. I quite rightly commended both police services on, you know, the cooperative nature of their work and the fact that they're having successes. Do ICSA have a similar relationship north of the border that you can reflect on these matters?
I suppose the quick answer at the moment is no, but we're working on it at the moment. We're dealing with individual farmers and organisations in the north. It's mainly down in the Republic at the moment, but it's something we're working on, yes.
Well then, the last thing, just Laura was making the point, Caesar, that's as in emperor, I presume.
Yeah, it's the brand name, yeah.
Brand name. Well, just looking at it, and you're quite right, I went along to a how would you sort an introduction to the marking procedure, the equipment being employed, hosted by the local division of the Garda Síochána in my own constituency. So I've seen it in operation. I know how it works. Have you any sense or idea of the uptake? Is it something that you're encouraging also? I think it's a no-brainer. That would be my own view. Any valuable equipment on any farmyard, should most certainly have the coded number impressed upon it. Is there an embrace of this, or is there a resistance? Can you just tell us what you know to be the case?
Well, I suppose there is an uptake on it. It's something that we have actually, as Laura has already said, and I must compliment Laura for doing it, it's something that we give a benefit to our members. They get a discount to get their stuff marked up. Isn't that correct, Laura? And at every meeting we have now, we discuss it. It's just a done thing. At every meeting we have, we bring this up. We talk about it. We're actually going to be holding meetings in the future where representatives of that company will come as well and talk about it and give demonstrations. And if you want to say something else on that, Laura.
I think it's a really simple, cost-effective way of providing a bit of security. I mean, and you don't even need to bring it to the guards. If you give it a belt of a hammer and take a picture of it, you can prove that, that was yours, obviously serial numbers, etc. But I think maybe that more publicity needs to be put into it, and a sense of security, that there's one big idea that everybody wants to follow, and that it's, whatever kind of branding is around it, but that acts as a deterrent. But I think people need to be encouraged, like right across the country, that this isn't like us being afraid of a particular area that the crime levels are high, that this is just a no-brainer, that you get a new piece of equipment and you mark it, and that's what you do. That's so it's about promoting it, I think, and the reinforcement of that. And we need to be all singing off the same hymn sheet now in terms of what the system is. We just need to pick the best one for our circumstance, but one that is connected across Europe, so that we can avoid, say, the jeeps and the quads and the trailers all going up north and they're gone across to Holland, within hours really. But if we can get it back, but we all need to be saying the same thing, just mark, and I say ideally the same one, and that guards have the technology to be able to assist in the tracing of that.
And just to finish up, Chairman, we've always been adamant the farmers have to, and rural dwellers, we have to play our part in this too. We can't just sit back and expect to be protected. We have to play our part, and I think we are stepping up to the plate, and we are going to play our part.
Well, that was the message I intended concluding with, Seamus. You've just stolen my lines. It is hugely important. We can't always be saying, oh, the Gardaí, or this or that. We all have a part to play, and not only in rural Ireland, right across the length and breadth of the country, if we are to see prevention in the first instance, significant reduction at the very, very least, and that the stats are an honest reflection of the facts out there. So, this is the final, you're the final presenters, as I'd just like to, on behalf of the Justice and Equality Committee, thank Feroiga and Winch na Tíre and Garda Síochána and the PSNI, the Irish Farmers Association, the Irish Cattle and Sheep Farmers Association, to thank all of you for your respective contributions over these 3 weeks of engagements, of hearings. The information impered in all cases was most valuable in the work that now lies ahead. The committee will be in the process of preparing a report with recommendations. We hope to have that concluded and ready for publication by the end of the coming month, by the end of November. So we'll probably be in touch with you to invite you back, maybe for a brief launch of that here in the audio-visual room at that time. So on behalf of the committee, I would like to thank the representatives of the Irish Cattle and Sheep Farmers Association, Seamus Sherlock and Laura Starnes. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here today to address these very important matters. We will now be going into private session briefly to deal with housekeeping matters, and we'll take a 30 seconds suspension just to allow you to withdraw. Thank you.